Thank you very much, Tor, for the nice words, and I hope I can live up to the expectations you've set up here. I'll do my best. I hope that many of you in the audience are fairly new to this game of fundraising, because I will do my best to introduce it from the very beginning and rush through things from A to Z. But first, a little bit about me. Now, Tor already said something. And yes, I have been one of those super annoying people who are very good at finding other people's mistakes since forever. I joined a university in 2003, and in 2007 or thereabouts, I sort of segued into fundraising. So as you can imagine, I have edited and proofread and so on pretty much any kind of text produced at universities since then. And contrary to what many people might think, I'm not really a big fan of repeating myself. So instead of doing this one-to-one, I began doing courses many years ago where I tried to teach some of the things to groups of people instead. And that is why I'm so happy to be here today and to try and share some of my insights from the past 20 years with you guys. Now, I can talk forever, even if you don't interrupt me, but I really, really enjoy talking about something that interests you as well. So whenever you feel like it, just holler or raise your hand, like Pernille said, or whatever, to gain my attention. I'm more than happy to deviate from my plans for today. But I do have a plan. And until you interrupt me, I'm going to stick with it. So first of all, I will talk a little bit about the aims and objectives of academic writing. It is my experience that some of the reasons might not have been apparent to all of you from the beginning. And then, of course, as promised, I'll talk about fundraising. I call it Fundraising 101 because, as I said before, I'm going to start from Adam and Eve and rush through the whole thing. And then at the end, there will be a lot of time for questions. So if you don't feel like interrupting me, write down a question and make sure to ask it when I'm done talking. Right. So unless someone interrupts me right now, I'm going to get started. No? In that case, here we go. The first thing I would like to say is that there are many reasons for writing in academia, and fundraising is only one of them. But the first is, of course, that in order for your research to make a difference, you need to tell people about it. And this is done in writing, obviously. Writing also has a huge influence on your career. If you're not able to write good grant proposals or papers that are read, then the chances of you making it in academia are very slim, unfortunately. And then, of course, the more you write and the better you write, the better for your university or hospital or wherever you're employed, because it makes it easier for the hospital or university to attract further funding and to advertise to scholars from around the world and to students to make it a more attractive workplace for everyone. So writing is super important. Not all of us, unfortunately, are natural born writers. So you will at some point face a lot of rejections. This is unfortunately part of life as an academic, but luckily in so many cases, these setbacks can actually improve your output in the end, because by having a manuscript or a grant proposal rejected, you have an opportunity to improve it and see why other people didn't like it. So it don't take it personally. It will happen, and it's an opportunity to learn. And as you can see here with the link, when you have the time for it, actually it can be very good for your career with a few setbacks early on. Now, many of you are probably wondering what will happen after your PhD when you stop to think about that. And I'm happy to tell you that good things are ahead, even though it may look confusing. Some 10 years ago, the Royal Academy of Sciences in England did a survey and found that more than half of the PhDs that graduated from English universities went straight out of science and to do something else entirely. A little less than half continued on as early career researchers, some as postdocs, some as assistant professors, and so on. Some eventually gained a position as permanent research staff, but as you can probably make out here, many of those eventually ended up outside of science anyway. And only about half of 1% ended up with a full professorship eventually. These numbers are from England and they're from 2013, so they may not be at all accurate for the situation in Denmark at this point. I just use it to illustrate that you will end up in a position somewhere. We just don't know where. Statistically, a professorship is not super likely, but it can happen, of course. Now, based on pure numbers for students at the University of Copenhagen, only about 1 in 20 postdocs have a shot at a tenured position. This is simply a matter of pure math, dividing the number of postdocs by the number of open positions every year. So the odds aren't good if you stay at the University of Copenhagen. However, every survey we've ever done shows that about 3 months after you complete your PhD or finish a postdoc position, 85% of you have a new job. So it's typically super fast to get a job. And luckily, each and every survey shows that people are very happy with the job that they find. So keep in mind that a career is what happens while you're busy making other plans. Don't use this as an excuse not to make plans, though. That's not a good idea. So how do we write something that people can actually use? Well, there is a trick, of course. There are many, but my key learning from the past 20 years is that none of us really like hard work. I know I don't. And unfortunately, editors and evaluators of grant proposals, they're typically very, very good at what they do, of course, but not necessarily in your particular field. And also, when they're very good at what they do, they tend to be super busy people as well. So making it difficult for them is not a very good strategy when you write to these people. So what you want to do is read this book. If you only ever read one book about writing, let it be a book about web design. This guy, Steve Krug, wrote the book 20 years ago on basically good communication. His point is, of course, that on websites, you typically have a window of opportunity of about 2 to 3 seconds to capture a visitor's attention. And if you don't capture and maintain the attention, they're gone. Same thing, unfortunately, happens in writing. So you will want to use clear, accessible language. And there are reasons why this is difficult for many of you, and I'll get back to this in a second. You'll also want to use short but varied sentences. Many of us tend to write far too long sentences when there's no one around to stop us. Also, use the active voice, please. Unfortunately, in particular in the medical sciences, the passive voice is gaining ground these years. For the past 10 years or so, more and more academic texts in the medical sciences appear that have been written in a passive voice, and that doesn't make for engaging reading. I'll get back to I could tell you now. The active voice is when the speaker or the thing we're talking about is present in the sentence. So a passive sentence is where the agent of change is missing from the sentence. The man was arrested is a passive sentence because he was arrested by the police, but we leave out by the police because we know, an arrest is made by the police unless we say something else. So the passive is certainly a useful form in the English language, but it makes for very, very boring reading, unfortunately, when you use it all the time. Avoid jargon and acronyms. You are being taught a new language, and as I'll get back to, you tend to overuse it and try to impress your readers with your mastery of all these arcane symbols and terms. And it can be quite difficult to read for people who are not as familiar with them as you are. And then, of course, don't tell it, show it. Don't say, interestingly, this shows that blah, 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 blah. The reason is, of course, not many people like to be told what to feel or how to feel about something. Even on a subconscious level, you run the risk that some of your readers will be turned off. So rather than say, interestingly, we are the first to do this, say, this has never been done before. The meaning is exactly the same, but now you have piqued the reader's attention and interest. And all of this is, of course, much easier said than done and calls for a lot of practice. Luckily, of course, unless you actually are a brain surgeon, you can redo your writing as many times as you want. As Richard Cormier says, the beautiful part of writing is that you don't have to get it right the first time, unlike, say, a brain surgeon. Yeah. All right. So I will move on to fundraising in just a second. I just want to mention that when you write to people, clarity of expression is super important. And in order to get to the point where you can write something that's easily read, you need to know that grammar is important, unfortunately. I myself find grammar super boring, but I have to teach it a little bit. And I found that many of us non-native speakers tend to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. So I'll very briefly run you through the mistakes that I can find in pretty much any text written by a non-native speaker and even some native speakers. So I call them the usual suspects, and this is really the core of my academic writing course that some of you may have attended or will attend at some point, that I give at the PhD school at the Faculty of Health. So the first one is, of course, the word order is different in English than in many other languages, or at least between Danish and English, there are some subtle differences. And in English, we want the verb as soon as possible in the sentence. This is not the way it's done in, say, German. So sometimes we write what seems to be correct English, but it just comes off as non-native. And sometimes it's gibberish. Then, of course, especially pertinent for Danes, we tend to fall back on the passive when we are insecure and when we think it's more formal to speak in the passive. So we tend to overdo the passive quite a bit. Then, of course, an anthropologist once told me that there's an interesting difference between Scandinavia and Northern Germany and basically the rest of the world, which is that in our part of the world, we tend to do away with the formal hierarchy at work. We signify professionalism by focusing on the task at hand, on the shared task, and not on people's titles. Whereas in you don't have to go further than the south of Germany, where it's unheard of to get in touch with a senior member of the faculty and not use their proper title, like professor so and so. This comes off as awkward in Danish. So spoken language is one thing, but when you write in English, you have to keep in mind that you don't know your audience and that most of your audience will expect you to use proper titles all the time, pretty much. There is a difference between have and has, and we call it subject-verb congruence, or it has many names. I'm not going to get into that, but this is something that's not necessarily super easy for Danes anyway, so we tend to get it wrong. The English-speaking world tends to use ing at the end of certain verbs, and so when a non-native speaker writes or speaks English, we tend to put ing on pretty much every verb that we can find in a sentence, and that makes for very difficult reading. Commas, we cannot avoid talking a little bit about those because they do change the meaning of a sentence, as you can hopefully see here. Poor grandma. Some of the last things people learn when they learn English is to maintain the same tense in their sentences, whether it's past or present or future. And of course, the use of prepositions in English are a joke unto themselves, and horribly difficult to explain. Basically, there are no rules. There's a trick, of course. I'll get back to that in a second once I've told you about the apostrophes. Unfortunately, Danish is under huge influence from the English language at the moment in these years, and Danes adopt rules from English, use them erroneously in Danish, and then transform the misunderstood rules back into English. And so apostrophes end up in all sorts of places where they don't belong, such as this one. And then, of course, run-on sentences. This happens when we speak, but it also happens when, particularly happens when we write. We think much faster than we type. So by the time our fingers have gotten to the end of what should have been a simple sentence, we will have thought of something else to say, and we just keep on typing. And that leads to endless sentences that are very, very difficult to read for a number of reasons. Now, any of these problems, you'll probably make some of them or most of them, or I think. But what you can do when you have written a sentence and to test whether it's actually proper English is super simple. You can put it in quotation marks and search for it on Google. When you do that, Google will only return the search results that have the identical set of words in that order with nothing in between. So what you do is you look at which websites have used this sentence in the past. And if they are Russian and Korean and Danish universities, then what you have written is likely not very good English. Unfortunately, Google tends to love Danish universities, so search results from Danish universities float to the top of your hit list when you do a search. And that means that the optimistic English you will find on many Danish universities' websites come off as proper English, which unfortunately it very often isn't. Be careful who you trust. Okay, so that was it about grammar. I know this wasn't what you signed up for, but do please keep these in mind when you write. About fundraising. Fundraising is a game, and one that you guys need to learn, because whether you end up in academia or in the private sector or somewhere in between, you will need to be able to sell your ideas in writing to someone, whether it's a granting body like the Novo Nordisk Foundation, or simply you're a team leader at the Novo Nordisk or whatever, wherever you end up. You will need to be able to explain your research in simple terms to someone. So first of all, we need to understand something very simple about fundraising. Unfortunately, and this has happened in the past 20 years, academia is a business. We need to make money. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Then, of course, you need to understand the role that foundations play and why they do what they do, and then I'll briefly run through 9 key concepts that you need to be aware of. I'm not asking you to understand them completely from a 5-minute run through in a second. But my point here is that academia is a business. So universities rely on government funding, and the basic source of funding is, of course, the central government budget, what we in Danish call finansloven. This is every year a tug of war between different parties in government about how much to spend on what. And so this is what pays for the light in the lamps at your desk and your computer and your chair and the nice people doing the cleaning and so on. Then, of course, we have external funding, which pays for your research, except it really doesn't. Because when you do research, you still need a chair to sit on, and you still need to, I don't know, have access to a lab that can do certain things, whatever. And that costs money. So in order for the university to make ends meet, we need you to include some sort of overhead in your budgets when you apply for money from a given foundation. Otherwise, the university will actually lose money when you get a grant. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but it costs the university more money than you get when you get a grant from, say, the Carlsberg Foundation, which for various reasons pretty much refuses to pay overhead. So this is important, and unfortunately, that's how it is. We just have to deal with it. Now, why do people set up foundations? Unfortunately, not to help you. The foundations don't really care about you personally. They care about some sort of result. They want to make a change in the world. They have, each and every foundation, they have a charter and a set of bylaws. And the smart people use the 20 minutes it will take you to read up on that before you sit down to write a grant proposal. Understanding what they want is the key to selling anything. And you, when you write a grant proposal, are selling a product that doesn't really exist yet. By its very nature, research is going somewhere we haven't gone before. So it doesn't exist, and we can't be absolutely certain that it will exist. So how do you convince people to buy that product? Well, it's complex, but spend the 20 minutes on the foundation's website and understand what they want before you sit down and spend like 10 or 100 hours on developing a grant proposal. It's a very good investment. And then understand that different foundations support different things. In Denmark, we have some public foundations. One of them is the Danish National Research Foundation, Danmarks Grundforskningsfond. They support basic research that hopefully is super radical. Think Niels Bohr or Crick and Watson. But at the lower end of the societal or technological readiness level scale. I'll get back to that in a second. It's basic research. The other end of the scale is applied research. Then we have, of course, the Independent Research Fund Denmark, and I put them in the middle because they work bottom up in the sense that you can apply for anything, anywhere on this matrix. You can position yourself with your proposal. Anything is viable. Innovationsfonden, the Danish Innovation Fund, Innovation Fund Denmark, sorry, they only support research that is very close to the market and which can somehow, add to the number of employed people in Denmark or open up a new market for a specific company or something like that. We have the private foundations. You may have heard of Lundbeck Fonden, the Lundbeck Foundation, and they pretty much support applied research or close to applied research of a relatively radical nature. Novo Nordisk, I put them up here in this section because they support so many things by now that it's difficult to pinpoint where they sort of belong in this matrix. But generally speaking, they don't really support basic research, even though they say so from time to time. Now, in order to develop a convincing grant proposal, of course, you need to keep in mind that people understand the world in terms of narratives. We tell stories to each other. And facts don't change minds. Narratives do. Samuel Goldwyn was a very famous guy in Hollywood before the Second World War and after. And this quote, in screenwriting, the first 5 pages are everything. Start with an earthquake and build to a climax, is attributed to him and to many others. It's I don't know who actually came up with it, but it could have been him. And the point is, of course, you want to capture your audience's attention and you want to maintain it. Don't let them look away. And the same thing is very, very true for grant proposals. Don't bore your readers. If you put in 7 pages that look like they come straight from Wikipedia, there's a very good chance that your grant proposal will end up on the maybe I'll read this later list. Don't give them an excuse to put your proposal there. Keep it entertaining. And of course, there is this Venn diagram of what you want to do and what the specific call text tells you you can do, and the foundation's charter. Now, I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to you, but successful applications, of course, manage to produce a narrative that covers all 3. This is how you make a successful application. Understand that you cannot necessarily get paid to do whatever you want to do, but some of it can from this particular foundation. And then maybe we can find another foundation to support something else you want to do. I have these 9 key concepts that I constantly find that this list of 9 key concepts that I constantly find that especially young researchers sometimes miss out on. So I'm going to mention them to you now, and you will have the slides afterwards so you can look them up and maybe study a bit on your own. The first one is, of course, the technological readiness level scale, which was developed by NASA as a means to determine obviously the readiness of a given technology. So at one end of the scale, we have basic research, and at the other, we're basically in the market or very close to the market. Typically, universities work from TRL 1 to TRL 6 or 7 or something like that. And as you can see in this image, at some point around TRL 3 or 4, typically academics will begin to collaborate with other academics or with industry or organizations, stakeholders, politicians, whatever, on development of these technologies. Of course, after this was introduced, someone said, well, we also need something called the societal readiness level, because it doesn't help anyone that you develop, say, a cure for Ebola if the people who actually suffer from Ebola think that this cure is toxic and will kill them all. This was actually a problem with one of the attempts to develop a vaccine against Ebola at some point. So we need to ensure that the recipients of your research are ready to accept it as well. This is where anthropologists and sociologists become super important. All right, so I'll get back to why, but excellence is one of the key concepts that you really need to understand. It is has to do with the state of the art in your field. You need to show that you know and understand the state of the art, not necessarily that you know everything about it, but that you know who does and what it is, what your technology can do at the moment.
Nikolai, you are unmuted.
Hello, I just want to tell that it seems that you are unmuted.
Yeah, we can't hear Nikolai, but I think it's an issue with his microphone. So we'll just give him a moment to see if he can fix it.
Still no, Stefan?
We can hear you now, Nikolai.
Oh.
So you're back.
Yes, I am indeed.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second.
Yeah, I reset my headset because I thought it was my fault I couldn't hear Stefan.
Okay. Stefan said that we couldn't hear you. So
Oh.
Yeah, we lost you for a second. I think it was an issue with your microphone.
Sorry about that, but thank you for making me aware of it. I hope you can hear me now. I'll just keep going until you stop me somehow. Yeah, so impact. We need to make a change in the world with our research, and that's what we mean when we talk about impact. Impact can be many, many different things. Of course, it can be as simple as, a patient in the clinic who suffers from hair loss, and they eat a blue pill and their hair loss is reversed and they grow a full set of hair, head of hair. That would be one kind of impact. But impact can also be when you write a number of papers based on your research, and other researchers pick up on what you have been doing and build on that in some way. That's also impact. So impact can be when a politician decides to follow your suggestions. You've made an impact then. It can be so many different things. But without impact, your research is basically useless to the world. And impact is what the foundations pay for. They don't pay for your research. They don't care, to be honest, about you or your research. They want to see a change in the world. So you need to be able to make an impact and explain how this impact comes about. Then, of course, you also need to demonstrate that you know how to run a project. So the implementation phase, what you will do, how you will do it, when you will do it, is also important. I've shown you a Gantt diagram here. And this is not by any means the only way to organize a project, but it is a very good thing for you to do, to work out whenever you build a grant proposal, to make sure that you know what you want to do, whether or not you include it in the application or whatever. Okay, so that was 4 key terms. The next are hopefully a bit shorter. Feasibility. Demonstrate that you have thought this through in terms of budget, deliverables, and milestones. You need to have a risk management plan, a deck plan for dissemination, exploitation, and communication of your research to various groups. In many, many cases, you should also have a gender equality plan, of course, and a data management plan is by and large a requirement in all sorts of health research. So I'm not expecting you to have these memorized later today, but I would encourage all of you to look through these slides and make sure that you at least have understood that these terms exist by the time we're done here. All right, so how do we find some funding? It's super easy because we have 14,000 foundations in Denmark that can support research. And so many of them you'll already know, the Novo Nordisk Foundation and so on. You must be aware, should be aware that Augustinus and the Obelske Familie Foundation, they got their money from tobacco. So you will be banned from applying for funding from the Cancer Society or the Heart Foundation if you get a grant from Augustinus or the Obelske. Be careful. The European Union fund so much research. So in terms of your career, this is where to go. At present, of course, Pillar 1, Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions are probably the most relevant for you, but eventually all of it will become relevant. Seek out people who can tell you about it and make sure you understand it. This is where your career opportunities lie if you want to stay in academia. You can find the open calls via your network or by checking acknowledgements of the last 5 or 10 papers you've read. Make a list of the foundations that have supported the research you read about, because they might support you next time. You can also join a senior researcher's proposal. They should be working on one right now, so make sure that they can find you if they need you. Make sure to update your profile in whatever organization you work in. At the University of Copenhagen, it's your Curious profile. And actually, you can do the same thing as the one with the papers, simply by looking up your leading figures in the field at, for instance, Web of Science, and see where they got their funding. You can develop a compelling grant proposal by asking yourself why 5 times in a row. The cat there is watching a movie, of course. Think about yourself in a movie theater. You don't want your audience to be looking at their wristwatch during the movie. Same thing with good research proposals. You want to capture their attention, keep them focused. So ask yourself why 5 times and see if you can get to the core of your idea that way. Make a PowerPoint and test it on friends, convert it into a 1-page and test it on family, and then make a brief product description and test it on colleagues. At some point in this process, someone will say, but have you thought of, and say thank you to whomever starts an argument with you. And if and only if your idea still holds up, you should start the actual grant writing. Start with the abstract, write the whole thing, and then go back and rewrite the abstract, because you will have learned something along the way when you write the actual grant proposal. Keep in mind that academic writing and grant writing are 2 different beasts altogether. So in academic writing, you establish a coherent argument and appeal to logic, as we say in the field of rhetoric. Whereas when you write a grant proposal, you're really in the field of advertising. So you're selling a product that doesn't exist, and you're appealing to you want to make them you want to make them want your product. So you're probably trying harder than you have to. It is much easier than you might think at this point. With Aristotle, we were taught that the burden of proof is on the author in academic writing. There are other ways to do it, like Gilles Deleuze here, who would claim that he's a French post-structuralist. You might not know him, but he will make a claim, say like the moon is made of green cheese, and then he'll write a sentence that's 3 pages long without a full stop in there. And by the end of that, he'll say, I could write this. You're not even smart enough to read it, which means I'm smarter than you are. So you have to accept my original claim. I'm making fun of the pro-structuralists. It's a longer story than that. However, Pierre Bourdieu showed, he's a sociologist, very interesting. He showed that we tend to overdo it language-wise when we communicate, especially with strangers. We try to impress people all the time. And you do that as well. You are learning a new language. You are the most junior members of a community where everyone around you is smarter and more experienced and have seen it all already. So on some level, consciously or not, you are insecure. And this is not something wrong with you. This is perfectly natural. You want to show you belong. Otherwise, you might be put to the wolves if bad things happen to the tribe. This is very basic human nature. So I'm telling you this in the hope that you will try and keep your inner peacock in check. Don't try to brag or impress us too much. We do it a lot in Danish, and we add stuff to words and phrases that make them literally meaningless, but we pile stuff on to appear smarter than we really are. And bad things happen when we do that. Now, a garden doesn't look like this all of itself. It calls for some preparation. And you can do that as well. Before you write your own thing, whenever someone asks you for help, say yes and revise their draft for them. By doing so, you gain a friend and they owe you a favor, and you learn a lot about how language works. I can talk about languages all day, but the only way to really learn is by doing it. And this is one of the best ways I know. And then, of course, make good habits happen. Make sure that you practice what I preach and put it in your calendar. It doesn't happen of itself, grant writing. And this is one of the things that many people tend to postpone until the very last minute. But unfortunately, that's not a good strategy. It's not very successful. Truly successful grant writers work on their grant proposals pretty much every day. Maybe just for 15 minutes, but each and every day. But if you set aside some time to work on this in your calendar, you can look at the calendar and consider all the rest of the time free from the burden of grant writing. You don't have to feel guilty because you've put it in your calendar. You know that you'll be doing it later today or tomorrow or whenever. Don't make your own illustrations. Ask someone who are actually skilled at making good illustrations. There's a long story behind this one. It's super interesting. And it's a very good illustration. And good illustrations tell a story. Bad illustrations are a waste of space. Ask someone who can really produce something good for you. There's a lot of links here for you that you can use in your own time. I will say that we have to accept the fact that ChatGPT is the tool of the future. And we all have a lot to learn about that. So I've put in one link for you about how to personalize ChatGPT to make it produce text that is almost identical to text you produce. It's actually not that difficult and very, very very, very useful. Once you've written something, you can improve it. And this is a key tip. Go somewhere secluded where no one can hear you. Bring your phone and record yourself as you read your text out loud. Pretend you're an actor on a stage and your voice has to carry to the people in the upper reaches. And then mark the sentences where you run out of breath in one color. And the sentences where you cannot pronounce the words in another color. And then go home. And what's happened here is that you have written sentences that are far too long. That's when you run out of breath. And the sentences you cannot pronounce, 9 times out of 10, it's because you have mangled the grammar somehow. So go home and fix that. And then, of course, listen to yourself and fix the syntax. The syntax, again, is sometimes you can say things that are in English words, but just that's not how an English person would say it. And you can hear that on your own recording. Another thing you can hear is that the music of your language, the prosody, is probably not the way a British person would say the same things. But by hearing yourself speak, you get a very tangible sense of where you get it wrong. And that will help you pronounce and speak a better English immensely. I promise you, it's amazing the difference it makes. But one of the reasons I suggest you do this in seclusion is, of course, I find it embarrassing. I don't know about you, but I find it embarrassing to listen to myself. And then, of course, nothing prevents you from doing it over. once you have improved your text once, do it again and see what happens. I promise you, your text and your readers will love you for it. I have a few books for you. Made to Stick is about how to present ideas. Eat, Shoots, and Leaves is about commas. And of course, Don't Make Me Think is about good communication. Ostensibly about web design, but really about the philosophy of communication. Keep it simple, stupid. Stick to the basic sentence structure. Don't make it more complex than you have to. The simpler the sentences, the easier they are to read, and the happier your reader will be. Once you have written something, remove all the deadwood. Read through your text and ideally consider each and every word. See, what would happen if I were to remove this word? And everything that can go, take it out. Your reader will love you. Everything that's remaining in the text after you've done this will be so much clearer and easier to understand. And of course, the same thing with all your abbreviations and jargon. Get it out. Use Google in quotation marks. The example here, there is something rotten, is because a Dane will say there is something rotten, whereas Shakespeare would say something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Fanboys, it's an acronym for words that you should be looking for when you're in doubt about where to put a comma in a sentence. If you see any of these words, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so, then it's a very good idea to put a comma in front of them. But basically never ever put a comma in front of that. Unfortunately, Danes tend to do that a lot, but more often than not, you ruin the sentence by doing that. Again, rewriting is key. Write the abstract first and last. And then, of course, keep in mind that this guy, Ernest Hemingway, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature many years ago. And he wrote, among other things, a novel called The Old Man and the Sea. He wrote it, the manuscript by hand, of course, with a pencil. And several pencils, I presume. The very last page of The Old Man and the Sea exists in the Hemingway Museum in the Florida Keys in 60 different versions. He rewrote that last page 60 different times before he was satisfied with it. Now, I'm not saying you should do the same, but if he could do it 60 times, I guess once or twice won't kill you. I hope it won't anyway. Your readers will love you for it. When you want to become a very good grant proposal writer, what better way than to look at very good grant proposals? So my mission to you, should you choose to accept it, is right away to sign up as an evaluator in the European funding and tender system. It's a link, of course. You can just click it and you'll end up on that page. And you, at the bottom right there, you can hopefully see there's a big blue button called Register. Click that and it will take you through the process. It takes all of 10 minutes. And by doing that, you put your name in the hat and may be called upon to review and evaluate research proposals written by the best and the brightest in your field. So do that. It's pretty much the best thing you can do for your career. Then, of course, if you only ever remember one slide from my presentation, let it be this one. The American NIH, National Institutes of Health, vast organization that provides incredible amounts of funds for research, health research. Quoting from memory, in 2017, they handed out $360 million to individual PhD grants alone. And someone, of course, analyzed all the proposals they received and found out what happened to them. And by chance, I heard that the Tryg Foundation had done the same thing, and their numbers were exactly identical to the NIH. Now, the Tryg Foundation is somewhat smaller than the NIH, and I'm from the humanities, so I only need 2 data points to form a conclusion, which is to say all foundations are pretty much the same, and all grant proposal writers apparently are pretty much the same. And this is what the numbers showed us. 75% of all submitted proposals and manuscripts are rejected before the actual evaluation. 50% because people apply out of scope. So if you are in peer research and you apply with the Apple Foundation, they must reject you. They cannot support you. Going back to what I said earlier about reading the foundation's charter, it's a very, very good idea to spend those 20 minutes before you sit down and write a grant proposal. 25% of all submitted proposals fail in terms of formalities. So when you have 10,000 characters to write, say, the project description of your proposal, and you spend 11,000 characters on that section, the foundation have an excuse or a reason to reject your proposal, and they will do so because they receive far more proposals than they can fund, and they have to ensure a level playing field. So understand the formalities and make sure that you follow the rules. 10% fail because of what I've called readability. It's a long story, but this is basically what I help my researchers with to make sure that the proposal is well written and end up in the hands of the right people by selecting the right keywords and so on, and writing a very good abstract. The abstract is absolutely key in any grant proposal. That leaves 15% of all submitted proposals that are actually evaluated. So when you hear your senior professors, your seniors and professors talk about a 90% rejection rate, just keep in mind it's because the vast majority of the submitted applications are actually fairly sloppy work, and it's very easily avoided, these mistakes. So ask someone in your organization to help you. Wherever you work, there will be some experts in grant proposal writing, people like myself in various departments and at the faculty level of universities, hospitals, they have the same. There's a research support office in Region H as well, and they are there to help you. Do ask, because it's not that difficult to avoid all of these mistakes, right? So that was it from me. So now I would very much like to hear the questions that you didn't ask along the way.
Thank you, Nikolai. Thank you a lot for this excellent presentation. So the floor is open for questions. Are there anyone who will? You can consider, or you can think about questions you have. I have one question for you, Nikolai.
Yes.
You have these 9 key concepts, and I've been in our applications to the Novo Nordisk Foundation, we put in one strategy theme around societal outreach or public involvement.
Yes.
And now I can see in UK there's a trend towards that you have to include patient when you are writing your applications. So you have to spare with a patient organization or a patient individual to get ideas of, are you on the right track?
Yes.
How will that be in Denmark, or is that also something that we should consider in Denmark?
It's definitely coming, yes. So if your field of research somehow is relevant for one of the patient organizations, I would strongly suggest that you at least have a conversation with someone from that organization as you develop your grant proposal. Again, going back to what I said about foundations, they don't support you. They don't care about you as researchers. What they care about is an end result. And unfortunately, experience has shown that when you fail to include the end users, then unfortunately, very often what happens is you produce something that's an incredibly innovative, nice advancement of the state of the art, but it's never taken up by the people you wanted to use it. And to avoid that, you should include the end users in the discussion as soon as possible. Now, obviously, it will differ from project to project how best to do this and how much to do it. But in health research, I would basically say it's relevant each and every time you sit down to write a grant proposal to at least make a phone call to the relevant organization and talk to them and say, we're thinking about this. Can you, off the top of your head, have an argument for or against or whatever this idea that we have here?
Okay. So anyone have a question for Nikolai? Please raise your hand.
Or I can maybe stop sharing now.
Yes. I have another question for you, Nikolai, if no one else has. So you talked about the ChatGPT and make use of it in the future.
Yes.
Will it then, if you're looking even further into the future, will it be ChatGPT also evaluating the proposals that are written by the ChatGPT? So it's a system going back and forth.
Why do you think it isn't already? Now, I don't know, but I would be very surprised if basically all the major foundations weren't actively looking into ways to set up some sort of automatic initial review of applications.
Okay.
Because I think it's useful to think of ChatGPT and the other large language models as pretty much the same way as the pocket calculator. It changed the field when it arrived and became publicly available, and people thought that the sky would fall and no one would ever be able to do math on their own anymore. But that's not what happened, and I think the same thing will happen with ChatGPT. It's very good at certain things, but there are also severe limitations to what it can do and how much you can trust it, and we need to practice and to figure out how to use it best. And I'm not sure anyone really has the complete answer at this point, but I'm not at all in any doubt that it will become a key tool in the future.
Okay. So we are running over time. I can see many of
We
the
just have a sorry, Tor. We just have a few questions in the chat.
Oh yeah,
okay.
I see.
One from Tina. What are the pros and cons of using parentheses to explain definitions in abstract or academic writing in general?
In an abstract, I would generally argue against using parentheses to explain people, because a parenthesis sort of takes you out of the overall narrative. It asks you to step away for a second and think about something else and then come back to the story. And I'm not sure that's a good idea. In the proposal proper, it's certainly useful because it shows the reader that they can skip a part of the text and move on with the narrative if they're not super interested in the nitty-gritty details of what you're talking about at this particular part of the text or the proposal. I hope that answered the question.
I think so. And then Nicole, you have started a question. I'm not sure we got all of it in the chat, but
Preliminary data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
It's
know.
not really a question I know how to answer, but of course, preliminary data can always be a problem in terms of getting funding. If you don't have your preliminary data, how can you argue that you know what you're doing? And if you already have the preliminary data, you already have done it. So why should a foundation pay for it, for you to do it again? So this is where a strong narrative is called for. But I'm not sure this is what Nicole really wanted to talk about.
If you have anything to add, Nicole, perhaps you can unmute yourself, and otherwise we will leave it with that.
No.
Hi, Nicole.
It is brief. Yeah, it wasn't a question, and I wasn't sure what to write afterwards. Yeah, it was supposed to be a question, but you sort of have already sparked and touched on it there about how strong the narrative needs to be if you don't have the preliminary data, and that fine line between having enough data that it's preliminary, like an N of 3 versus, and then where to even get the money for that versus having data that's, validated to put a point across, so much so that they're like, well, what's the point of actually giving you this money? Yeah.
This goes back to the term feasibility, where you have to convince the evaluators that you know enough about what you're doing that they will, grant you the money to actually do it, but not so much that it has already been done, because why would they pay for a repetition of a previous study?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a hard one.
It can
anyway.
be, yeah. Depending on your line of research, yeah. If preliminary data are really necessary, that's
especially going from a PhD to a postdoc. A lot of the time in these early postdocs, they're like, "How does this differ from your PhD?" And it's like, "Well, I haven't had any time to do any experiments other than my PhD experiments." So yeah. And saying that you are an expert in your field of this area and that you have enough, when it has to be different from your PhD. So many early career grants specifically ask, how does this differ from your PhD? So
many years ago, we realized that it was a problem for academics to join an organization and simply stay there. So many grants require you to demonstrate that you get away from your supervisor somehow. Obviously, the easiest way to do that is to simply switch environment and move to a different university or whatever, or a different section of that university. If you don't want to do that, it's super important that you come up with something that is fundamentally different from your PhD if you want to be granted a significant amount of money, of course.
Okay, I will just share my screen, and thank you again, Nikolaj, and thank you for your question, Nicole. I'll just share my screen and show what is coming up in relation to this grant webinar series. So we have a new webinar in a week from now on EU funding for postdocs. And then you can see the list down the screen here. I hope to see so many of you to the next webinars, and please contact us if you have any suggestions of new webinars that we should cover within this topic. We will be open and interested for suggestions indeed. But thanks again, Nikolaj, for taking your time, and thanks to all of you for taking your time and join this first webinar of this series of 7. And as mentioned, we will be back in a week from now, and we have recorded the webinar, and it will be put on our channels in the nearest future. I can say that. Okay.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to all of you, and I wish you the best of luck with your grant proposal writing.
Okay. Thank you.